Hi, I'm Quincas and I'm a synth DIY guy. Today we're building another full Eurorack module kit from Patching Panda, the Punch V3. Punch is a dual decay envelope generator and VCA with accent input, accent variation control, variable decay curve, VC decay time, and dedicated envelope outputs with switches to invert them. So you can use them for sidechain compression type effects, for example. And this version, which is number 3, has an additional switch to make the accent input into a velocity input, accepting control voltages instead of just triggers, making it super cool for bass sounds and amplitude modulation madness. The kit comes with all of the SMD components pre-soldered onto the PCB, just like the Vibrazum. You also get the high-quality matte black aluminum panel with cool graphics, some stickers, a printed guide, all of the hardware components, the power cable, nice aluminum knobs, and mounting screws. Assembly is a breeze, since you don't have to bother with any of the circuit components. I like to first organize all of the parts on the bench. Then install the power header, making sure it's nice and straight. I then trimmed the protruding leads on the other side. Next, I snapped on all of the pots, switches, jacks and LEDs without soldering them yet. Make sure you place 2 washers over each pot, so their height will match that of the jacks. Now carefully place the panel over the components and proceed to tighten the nuts. The silver banded nuts for the pots were a nice touch. Push the LEDs so they go through their panel holes. Then go ahead and start soldering. Trim the LED leads. Finish tightening the nuts. And snap on the knobs. And you're done. That easy. It took me about 20 minutes total. Now let's hear it in action. Alright, so let's have a look at the Punch in action. We're going to start by using it for its main intended purpose, which is as a combination envelope generator and VCA for percussive voices. Since it's decay only envelope generator, you'll be able to observe the envelope action over here on the Mordax data. I've already patched up the BeatStep Pro. The first 4 drum triggers are just triggering the voices, while triggers 5, 6, 7, and 8 will be used in some of these accent inputs to create dynamic variation. And we'll also play around with the voltage control decay function. So let's get started by making a little kick drum. And it's very easy to make a kick drum with the Punch because it has the envelope output that you can use for pitch modulation as well. So first we're going to take a sine wave from the filter 8. I'm going to patch it into input of my Punch number 1 module here. And as I hit the trigger here, the first trigger on my BeatStep Pro, there you have it. You hear that low thump if you're wearing headphones or using decent studio speakers. But now, if I send the first envelope to control the frequency of the filter 8, that sounds much more like a kick. So now I'm modulating the pitch, and I can control here with the attenuator, my filter 8 CV attenuator, how much I want that pitch modulation. And here's the decay. I can change the curve of the decay as well. So I can go from a more linear curve to a more exponential one, right? So between decay length and the curve, and of course the amount of CV here, I like that. That's a good kick right there. Is it nice and centered in the stereo field? There it is. Now it is. It's actually a nice kick. I got it very quickly. So the next thing I'm going to do is patch in some noise from my Erica synth modulator into the input of my Punch 2. And that's trigger 2 on the BeatStep Pro here. So let's just turn on the channel. Cool, that's a good enough hi-hat for me. I can maybe even emphasize the highs here and pan it slightly to the left. I can make it shorter if I want to. So to make an easy snare, I'm just going to take the noise output from my Vinicius Electric Multiwaves here. It's a digital noise where you can set the density with a knob. I can make it a darker noise than my white noise. So I'll turn on the channel here, and there you go. And here's the knob that sets the density. I'm going to leave it right there. And why don't we turn on a little bit of reverb? Right, just to make it a little wetter, a little nicer. And I have a fourth voice available because I have 2 punch modules. So why not maybe take a saw wave from my 3340 VCO, put it in there, turn on that channel, and I'll send the envelope, my 4th envelope here. Cool. If I make it a little longer, you get that kind of a disco laser zap kind of a sound. So cool. So I can start programming a beat, right? So let's take the hi-hat sound here, the white noise, and we'll just trigger every single one of the steps and start it. It's a little bit swung, kind of like that. Swing at 60 on the BeatStep Pro. Now let's program kick and snare, right? So 3, 4. Cool beat. So snare a little softer. A little bit to the right. Okay, so this is a pretty static beat, right? Pretty just straight ahead. No dynamics at all. Now, if I take trigger number 5 from the BeatStep Pro and plug it into my trigger CV input of the 2nd channel of punch here, I can now create an accent pattern with number 5 here. So that's more interesting. So let's listen to just that for a second. Maybe I'll even mute 1 or 2 steps here. Make it more interesting, right? Alright, so let's bring the kick back. Now I can do the same with the kick. I'll take number 6, trigger number 6 from the BeatStep Pro, and I'll stick it into the accent input on punch 1. Already changes it a little bit. Now we can use number 6 here to create some accents. We want 1 to be accented. And 14. Or 15 actually. There you go. A little bit less of that pitch modulation there. There you go. So now we have 2 levels of kick drums happening. So one is more like a ghost, almost a ghost note kick. And you can see what's happening with the envelopes over here in the oscilloscope. Now let's open up the snare again. And I can do the same to the snare. So I'll take trigger number 7, stick it into the accent input here. Now, in order to make that interesting, we have to make this snare pattern a little bit more interesting. So why don't we go back to number 3 here, and we'll make it double there, and now we'll go to 7. Emphasize 13 and 5. Okay. So that step 12 is just like a little ghost note leading into step 13. So that's pretty cool. We haven't done anything with that disco laser thing. Make it a little bit shorter. So it kind of emphasizes the snare a little bit. I kind of like it. So nice, cool beat. Now, why don't we play around with the decay lengths, right? So I have already patched up a couple of timed modules here. So one of them is my mux slicer, which is a sequencer. I'm using it as a sequencer. So why don't we send that to the hi-hat sound, the decay of the hi-hat, which is my second. And now each one of the sliders here on mux slicer, it will be the length of that step. That's much more swinging, right? So it's like the drummer's opening up some hi-hats. That's pretty cool, and I can, vary that in real time. Really improvise with it. I can even send a random voltage to the address input on my mux slicer here and have it skip around steps so it's not so predictable. Or I could use a sample and hold. I do have a sample and hold patch here that I want to use for the snare length. Why don't we attenuate it first? I'll send it to an attenuator here. So I have control. And we'll send it to the snare. And the little panda eyes light up, so it's really easy to know which one is which. Cool. So now that snare is varying its length randomly. So that makes it even more interesting and less repetitive. And there's another sample and hold here from my Erga Synths modulator, and I can send that to that laser. Kind of cool. Let's make that kick a little more present. Oh, the delay is not swung, so let's take the swing off. That's gonna work better with the unswung delay. Awesome. So that's a super cool beat I made, fairly simply and straightforward by using the punch modules. This is definitely a module I like having two of. Obviously, you can just have more voices. That's it for the first demo. There are other things that you can do now with the Punch V3 that you couldn't do with the previous versions. So I'm going to show you some of that in the next two examples. All right, so like I said before, Punch V3 has an additional control that the previous versions didn't have. And this allows you to do a few different things, a couple of different things. And I'm going to show you very simply one of the main ones. So the additional control is basically the switch over here that makes the accent input become a velocity input rather than an accent input. So instead of alternating between just two dynamic levels, you can now control the level linearly by sending it a CV signal. So it can be an LFO, for example, to just create amplitude variations. But in this case, I'm going to use it again for its main intended purpose, which is as a velocity input. So instead of drum triggers, we're going to use sequencer number 1 here on the BeatStep Pro. And we're going to send pitch data to an oscillator. I'll just take the 3340 oscillator over here. And we'll take the gate and we'll send that straight into the trigger CV input of my first punch. I'm just going to use one punch for this demonstration. And the velocity is going to go into what is now a velocity input because I flipped the switch here from accent to velocity. We'll take that saw wave, I'm a saw wave kind of guy, into the filter input over here, and from the filter output back into the audio input of my punch number 1. Right, and now we should hear something. There we go. Let's make that length a little longer. And again, there's no sustain on this envelope generator, so it's for more bassy percussive type voices, right? And why not send that envelope output to our filter as well? So, right, a little bit more reverb. Nice little bass voice there. 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4. So now with the knob position and velocity here, turn all the steps down. You know what? Let me truncate that just to make the demo easier. So now I can play around with the velocity and have quite a variation here. More resonance here on the filter. This is something you couldn't do before. You basically would only vary between 2 levels with the trigger input, accented and unaccented. And now you can send a variable CV in there. Just for fun, right now, let's actually send in like an LFO. And you do want to use like a positive only LFO, so I'm going to use contour 1 in cycle mode, loop mode. More like chaotic, because the contour is not timed with the sequence at all, so it's more interesting variation. And again, I'm modulating both the amplitude and the filtering because it's affecting the amplitude of the envelope. And now I'll take that velocity output and we'll use that for the decay length. So the part of our sequence that we were using for amplitude and filtering now is affecting the decay length. Much more interesting sort of bass lines than you can do with just a simple envelope and VCA combination that doesn't have these features. Now let's go on to our third demonstration for this video, which is something really cool that you also couldn't really do with previous versions of this module. So here we go. The third cool thing that I wanted to show you about the Punch V3 is to use it as a ring modulator. So important, you have to have the decay all the way down, because the decay basically becomes your amount, your ring modulator amount. So if you have the decay set to really fast, the fastest it goes, you can send a wave. Let's send a triangle wave in here to the audio input. And we'll take a second oscillator into the trigger input. And there you have it. Those are pretty much your classic ring modulator type sounds. A little bit of effect there. So that's lovely, but that's not all. Which is a switch over to velocity. I'm sending the contour 1 as a ramp generator in there. And now you can trigger that, so you can make it fade in and out. Right, so it's having a built-in VCA there for that ring modulator. And if I set it to loop, and the other thing is by sending a CV to the decay input, now I can control the amount of ring modulating effect. So let's send an LFO here from the filter rate. So that's setting the amount. So now if I go audio rate on all of that stuff, you can get pretty crazy. So let's bring the contour 1 up to about audio rate and the filter rate as well. And now you've got some pretty gnarly, massive, crazy, noisy modulation sounds. And this is definitely not something you would expect from a module which basically is supposed to be just a drum voice envelope generator VCA combination. So this is a nice surprise from this module. I'm very happy to have figured this out. I didn't really figure it out, it's in the manual. The manual has very nice graphic representation of how you would use this module as a ring modulator. So I'm just gonna have a little fun with this craziness for a little while. Meanwhile, if you like this video, hit like, subscribe, join me on Patreon, hit the little notification bell, leave a comment below, and stay noisy. See you soon. Bye.